We're back on Freshwaves. We're about to go into a new dimension. We're going to talk about intentions. We've got Bill Cotric in the station this morning from Changing Dimensions, and we are changing dimensions. So let's talk about this word, because it's a word that comes up in my life all the time as an expressive arts practitioner. I use the word intention all the time. Set your intentions. And even if you're going to write poetry, set your intentions before you begin, and you may find a path that you weren't expecting. So tell me about intentions.
Yeah. So, I think it's important to define what intention is for an individual. Because if we assume that, an intention is the same thing for all of us.
I intend to wake up, and eventually sometime today I intend to go back to bed.
Yeah. And it's how you wake up, too. Like, I wake up every morning in gratitude. So from the moment I wake up, I remember to be in gratitude that, I can stand. I'm still walking. I can walk to the washroom. I'm still able to pee. Isn't that great? Right? All of these little things.
So you don't wake up and say, oh my God, it can't be 6 o'clock already.
No, not at all. No, I'm always grateful that I've woken up, and I start my day with gratitude. And so intention a lot of times is a misunderstood want.
Okay.
Sometimes people want something that they really don't want. They think that, I had a client that said to me, I want to be on the cover of Time magazine.
Uh-oh.
And
Careful what you wish for.
I said, okay, so that's your intention, right? So do you know how people get on the cover? Yes, I know that they usually do something that's really phenomenal, and that's what gets them there. But I don't really care what it is. I just want to be on the cover. So you can see that, the intention is to be on the cover, but what is that really about? What's underneath that, right? And that type of intention is more based in ego. So when I worked with that particular client and we understood what was most important to him was his wife, his kids, his ability to have a creative output, right? And it wasn't so much about being on the cover, right? But when we measure ourselves against other people, sometimes the intentions that we have become these, more about the external than it has to do about who we really are and what we want to actualize. So the kind of intentions that we work with in coaching are the ones that are really meaningful to who you are. Right. So if I was coaching you, Bren, I'd really want to understand, what it is that you get from being on the air, right? And you'd start to give me a sort of a list of values, believe it or not, that we could look at and then, determine how you could have more of that in your life, because that is about living into and actualizing who you really are, right?
It's a nice way of looking at it too.
Well, it's a very comfortable way for people because it really does reside in who they really are as opposed to who they think they're supposed to be. It's this self-acceptance, right? So, I'm a coach, but I also have a coach, and I love getting into all kinds of different things. And, what happens to me is I start to talk about that with my coach, and she'll say, so how does that connect with you sitting at your cottage in your breakfast room with your wife over a latte, just talking about nothing? And I go, it doesn't fit. It just takes me away from that. And so, in our ego state, we want to build up all kinds of different things. Right. But in the end, it's what's most important to us, right? And so coaches deal with mortality to a certain degree. Most people don't realize that they're going to die. People will say to me, if I die, it's not if, it's when.
It's when. This is a certainty.
Right? So getting really clear on what's important to you and what you want to experience in life, those kinds of intentions are meaningful and they're real, and they will bring you tremendous fulfillment. So those are the kind of intentions we can call them goals or what have you. I mean, in executive coaching, sometimes there's a prescription of what they want to see, right? Better communication. So I do these 3-way, 4-way meetings, what I call alignment meetings, to make sure that my client is aligned with the goals that the organization sees for them and their leadership. And so if somebody's saying better communication, I will ask them, well, what does better communication look like to you? So that we can clearly work on that intention. And sometimes the response back can be something as like, well, with more oomph. And then you're saying, okay, so how do you define oomph? What does that mean?
That's a good word.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, we're not really saying. And then they'll look at my client and say something like, well, you know how Bob communicates. He's such a great communicator. Like, we want you to communicate like Bob. And I'll say, okay, well, I don't know Bob. So what are characteristics of how Bob communicates? Oh, geez, wow, I'm not sure, right?
It's hard to put your finger on
Yes.
it.
And so if you don't have clear intentions and clear goals of what you want to achieve, then what are we doing? And most of the world is operating this way. They're quick starts. They're just like, oh, yeah, got it. Okay, doing it. But what are they doing, right? And so, better communication. Sure, I'll be a better communicator. Well, how are you going to be a better communicator? What's the vision of that? What does it look like, right? And so coaches get very clear with their clients about what it is that you want to achieve. And so sometimes, it's kind of like playing devil's advocate. It's like we're, poking away at, we call it peeling back the onion, taking back layers and layers and layers.
Onions make you cry. It's probably better an orange.
Yes, but there's not as many layers with the orange.
That's true.
And people are complicated. There's lots of layers.
There certainly are.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these layers are, as you sort of touched on earlier, societally imposed.
Yes.
Whether that is something that we just feel has been imposed, or whether it is the reality of the society. And when I say society, it can be society when you're looking at a global impression of society. It can be as small as the society that's created within a corporation and its little city, because some of them are so massive. An IBM, for example, that's just a massive corporation.
Yes.
It is a society unto itself.
Yes.
So there are expectations societally that you can't ignore. You can't just say, today I'm going to decide that I'm going to be Babalu and I'm going to come in dressed in all kinds of funky clothes and do exactly what my passion is.
Right.
It wouldn't last very long.
Well, it's, again, it comes down to, like, we're all living in different cultures where there's certain norms, right? And we either buy into those or sometimes we'll challenge them, but most of us accept that this is the way it is, right? So I can give you an example where I had a female executive who was late for a coaching session, and she comes in and she's all frantic, and she says, I've been sitting in the parking lot in my car talking to my mother. She's driving me absolutely crazy. Like, she calls me 2-3 times a day. And I said, oh, so is that something that you want to incorporate in our coaching conversation today? If this is something that's ongoing and getting in the way and what have you. And she goes, Bill, you don't understand. She's a Jewish mother. This is what they do. I said, well, okay, but if you could have the relationship you want with your mother, would it be worthwhile spending some time talking about it? Oh my God, Bill, this is not going to change. Well, no, you're right. It's not going to change if you keep saying it's not going to change.
If your intention is to
but
have
if
it
it
not
could change, would you want it, right? And she said, absolutely, I would want it. So, long story short, I did coach her around it. She went away to have a conversation with her mother, and she comes back to the next session, and she's mad. She's really mad. And I'm like, she's telling me, I said, how did it go with your mom? And she said, well, I talked to her and I told her, that this is what's happening. You're calling me all the time. I'm in the middle of things. I'm a busy executive, blah, 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 whatever it was. And she turns around and says to me, oh my God, I'm so happy. Like, I thought you needed me to be calling you, because sometimes, like, I'm with my friends and I'm thinking, oh my God, what kind of mother am I? I haven't called her yet today.
Oh,
I said, but you seem so angry about it. She goes, I'm angry at myself. I could have stopped this years ago. Right? And this is the type of thing. We somehow, the beliefs, that word belief, what are we believing? right? And if we have a really strong belief that something can't change, then guess what? It's not going to. But if you believe that you can have the life you want, the work you want, the interactions you want, then they'll come to you. They'll absolutely come to you. There's a lot of people that say, oh, I don't have a very good relationship with my brother or my sister or whatever. Well, would you like to have a good relationship? And it's about, breaking the habit of how you interact with someone and being a leader in where it can go. And
now, in a corporate situation, it seems a little more tricky because you had a boss that was a bully. So you've got the bully entity up there that you are very cautious of because they're going to stomp on you no matter what. It's just their MO. And you can have all the great intentions you want, but you're still dealing in a corporate situation with a bully kind of a person, but they're the ones that have the ability to hire you and fire you.
Okay.
So it puts you in a more subservient position where you may not feel like you have any choices.
Well, again, I think that's where, if people are looking at the relationship that way, then yes, that's how they're probably going to be thinking. But if they're looking at it more from the standpoint, what is it that I'm bringing here? And how do I want to actualize this based on what I understand my role is in the organization? And so this is about communicating in a way that takes into account not just how you're feeling and what you're wanting, but also what your boss is wanting and what the organization wants from you. And when you marry all that together and sit down and, describe your intention for the work you do, then you get buy-in right across the board. But if you're just looking at it from your own perspective of what you want without taking into account what your boss maybe is wanting or needing, and a lot of times it's about making your boss look good, right? Yeah. And there's some people who have a real aversion to that, but, strategically, it's not a bad thing to do, right? And then also understanding where the organization's going. But managing up is something I always talk about, whether it be, somebody who is a, top leader in the organization or whatever. I mean, they report to a board of directors. And sometimes the board of directors, the initiatives that they're putting forward, don't really fit for the organization. So, it's about managing up now and going back and saying, okay, this is what we would like to do with this initiative or the intention that you have for the organization because of this, and this. And the experts in my organization are saying this. So now with this information, how do you feel about your intention, right?
That's an interesting thing. Managing up.
Managing up, yeah.
That would take a lot of courage, I think, to manage up.
Yes, and that's one thing. Millennials have a lot of courage about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a girlfriend who's been in HR for 25 years. And she used to be in a position where she would sit, person would come in, and she would have all of her interview lined up, and they would answer the questions, and then they would leave. She said, now she sits there, they come in and interview her. What have you got to offer me? Why should I bother working for you? Yeah. And she said, it's a whole different ballgame. And it took her a little while to get used to it.
Yeah.
And she said now it actually makes her smile, because some of these millennials come in and they're just so fired up and they've got so much great intention and good energy, and she just wants to harness it and use it.
Yeah.
But she has to have something to offer them as well.
Well, exactly. And that's the balance, right? Of really, what is it that you have to offer? And if it's a value and it fits, then it's a win-win, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Bill. We're going to continue talking about intention, because intention is really key to a lot of things in our lives. We'll be right back. You're listening to Freshwaves.
Hi folks, Kim Mitchell here. You know, however you choose to get around, your ATV, your snowmobile, your boat, car, if you have a motorcycle, all these things take 100% of your attention and skill to operate safely. Alcohol impairs that, and bad things can happen. So, be smart, okay? You know what I'm going to say next.
This message brought to you from the Safe and Sober Awareness Committee.
Do you find that mainstream FM radio plays the same classic rock songs over and over, and rarely, with the exception of specialty programs, play backtracks or B-sides from your favorite albums? I hope you can join me, Chuck Roberts, on Friday nights at 9 p.m. for my one-hour show, Classic Backtracks. We'll explore the backtracks or B-sides from classic rock artists from the 60s through the 90s, and play the songs that you don't usually hear on mainstream radio. And hopefully we'll play a hidden gem that brings back some fond musical memories. During my show, I also profile a Canadian rock artist in my Coast to Coast segment, and each week close the program profiling a classic rock artist's contribution to rock music from bands to solo efforts or collaborations. That's Classic Backtracks on Friday nights at 9 p.m.
We're having a great conversation on and off the air with Bill here this morning. Bill is the, are you the CEO or the...
Well, you know what?
I'm the guy. You're the guy.
I'm the guy. It's a coaching practice, right? So I don't look at it as a corporate entity. I am the entity, right?
You are the entity.
Yes.
Which many coaches are.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So you go into a corporation. Usually you're called, but they must know you then if you're called in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been doing this for more than 15 years now, so, word gets around, and I'm actually surprised sometimes how far and wide the word does get. But, people do talk, and the best way of developing your coaching practice is actually to have people who have really made tremendous change in their life, and others see that, and they usually attribute it to the coaching, and so people are like, wow, I want some of this.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So take us through how it goes in a corporate setting. You walk in the door, you know that you're there to help Executive Fred. And Executive Fred didn't want you. Somebody else said, you need to go see Fred. So you get there and Fred's sitting there looking at you. Now what?
Yeah, well, sometimes they do give them a choice. Sometimes we have like a 20-minute, half-hour discussion with maybe 3 or 4 coaches that they're considering that their organization has said have the credentials that they're looking for, and so they do have the ability to choose a lot of the times now, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just, on the basis of the work that you've done with others, especially in an organization, if you've coach certain executives in that organization and there's been good results, then they might want you specifically to work.
Continue.
Yes, right, with other people. So how it works is really aligning the goals or the intentions, for the individual. But bottom line is coaching has to be the coachee's agenda. Doesn't matter who's paying for it, who the sponsor is. It has to be the coachee's agenda. So regardless of what the organization wants, if the individual doesn't buy into it, then, there's an issue, right?
Well, it's just like the mother that you were just describing. If you're not buying into the fixing of it, if you're only saying it's not going to work, then it'll never work.
Yeah. And sometimes, it's language. It's just language, changing the language. So I had an executive that, really wasn't delegating. A lot of people move into management and leadership positions because of their technical expertise.
Right.
And because they've had such great strength in it, they're not willing to let it go. And so they, tend to, get their fingers in everything. And so this particular individual, the mandate was that he delegates more, right? And so I could tell that he really was not comfortable with that word. And I said, what is it about? He goes, I don't like it. It's like, it's like delegating. I hate it when people delegate it to me, and I don't want to be that kind of leader. I said, well, what kind of leader do you want to be? What do you want to do with your people? He goes, I want to empower them. I said, okay, let's talk about that. And as he was talking about that, and he talked about it for some time, he went, wow, I guess there's quite a bit of delegation in what I'm talking about.
Right.
I said, okay, so what if you change the word to I'm going to empower my people instead of I'm going to delegate to my people? How does that? He goes, well, that fits perfectly for me. I said, okay, great. And so now you've got the marriage between what the organization wants and what the individual wants, right? But more importantly, his value of empowering his people. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be so different. It's just our perception of how we see things. So coaching, a big part of it is what are the perceptions that you're carrying about yourself, about the situation, about the people around you, right? You know, is your boss really a bully, or, you know, is it the way that they're sort of showing up that takes you to a place of a different understanding, or is it a protective mechanism because they're really a teddy bear and they don't want to be taken advantage of, you know? So it's poking at some of these things and changing the language and the really getting to the deeper understanding of what's really going on, right? And then, you know, moving towards the initiative, right? And so just by changing the word, but you have to have a conversation around it, right?
Right. You have to have the conversation, and you have to have that whole, I guess, the openness to invite a coach into the situation. Because I think a lot of people in the workplace are dealing with, like you said, the hamster thing, but not only the hamster wheel, but the idea that it'll never change, that it'll never change, that it'll never, it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is.
Well, and you know, that word belief, you know, the beliefs and assumptions that we carry, right? They can either be empowering or they can be limiting. Right? And so by taking our beliefs and disputing them, right? There's a tool we use in coaching. It's called the ABCDE tool, right? And so
Sounds like the beginning of the alphabet.
Exactly. And so we all experience some sort of activating event. Something happens, right? So A is for activating event. So something happens, and immediately we start to form beliefs and assumptions around what just took place. Oh, this must mean this. You know, like your best friend has been late for lunch again. So you're sitting there going, yep, they don't respect me. You know, they don't care about my time. You know, there's a whole list of... And then there's C, consequences that come out of that, right? Your relationship with that friend might be affected. You might have an argument. You might have a heated discussion about it. I mean, who knows what, right? But when you dispute those beliefs and assumptions, when you really sort of poke at it from what's the reality, what do I really, really know, as opposed to what am I assuming, that's when you can hold a different perspective on the situation, right? And then it's E, energizing. It energizes you into what you're able to do now moving forward. So coaching is all about what's happening now going into the future. What's your intention for the future? We don't spend a lot of time with the past. It's like, yeah, okay, this has happened to you. What do you want to do about it now? Right? Because, you know, there are people that just want validation. You know, the victimitis, you know, where people are just like feel bad for me. Like, you know, I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, right? You know, I had this one woman say, well, I didn't have a choice. I had kids to feed. I said, yeah, that was your choice. There are some mothers that don't choose that, right?
That's
you have
true.
a value of family, right? So you chose to do this so that you could put food on the table for your kids.
Don't beat yourself up about that. Be proud of it.
Exactly. Right.
And then you look at it in a different light.
Right. So it's the changing perception of what's actually going on with you, right? And just because that's who you were doesn't mean that's who you are today. And so don't let that limit, especially the dreaming of what can be, right?
Yeah.
You know, another thing that connects to intention is optimism.
That's true. Which kind of goes right along with gratitude, doesn't it?
Absolutely, because if that's the starting point. If you're not in gratitude for what you have, for the skills that you have, for the resources that you have, then what are you building from, right?
Yeah, that's true.
You're not really seeing what it is that you're starting with, and how you can utilize that. I score 9.5 out of 10 on every assessment when it comes to optimism. And in the old days, it used to be that, oh my God, red flag, he's living in the land of rainbows and Care Bears, right? Not very realistic. But actually now we know that people that are optimistic from neuroscience, we know that they actually have this rapid ability to analyze things, both with the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, to understand what they have as far as a skill set to approach whatever it is. And that's where the optimism comes from. It's actually from an analytical ability from the left and right hemisphere. So, So it's not just, out of the sky. Exactly.
It's almost fake it till you make it kind of a
it's almost more left brain than it is anything else. It's like you have the information, you've done the quick, rapid speed analytical analysis to understand that you have the ability to make that happen. I mean, that's what we have. Planes in the air and cell phones and all these things that, people would go, oh, well, that's never going to happen. How, people flying in the air, or, when we were kids and we were watching Star Trek and they'd flip open their phones, it's like, oh, yeah, right, where's the wire? That's never possible. There's all kinds of magical things that are happening all around us. I mean, talk about intention. In China, they're teaching 7-year-olds to write with both hands on different subject matter, and they're doing it. People are amazing.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah.
So we are not tapping our full potential. And coaching gives people the opportunity to do that by really taking a really deep look at who you are. What are your resources? A lot of people don't even know what their strengths are.
No, and I have come to know over the years that when I see somebody who has amazing potential, sometimes they don't know it. Sometimes they don't want to know it. They're really happy and really content being on that hamster wheel.
Yeah.
It's what gives them satisfaction. It's how the retail industry works. When someone turns to me and says, oh, I love that bag, you will get so much pleasure from that bag. And I think, oh no, did I ever make a big mistake? I should never have bought this bag because I don't feel the same way about it as you do.
Yeah.
But there are people who do get that pleasure and do get that fulfillment and that validation in that way.
Well, this is what you're talking about now is really important as it relates to coaching and being a coach, because certainly I see the full potential of someone, but a big part of this is choice. Right? Just because I see the potential, it's not my agenda for you.
Right.
It's your choice of what you want to actualize. And so, maybe you could do this and that and all these amazing, what I think are amazing things, but do you think they're amazing? Right? And so,
that must be tricky for you. It must be hard for you sometimes to realize that although you know
absolutely.
That this person could conquer the world.
That's the thing that challenges me the most, especially with younger people. I find that, a lot are very content with where they're at versus where they're going. And I come from a generation where we were always looking at where we were going next.
Yes.
What's next? What's next?
Yes.
What's next? So, but that...
Go higher.
Exactly.
Push yourself to the next limit.
More, bigger titles, more money, bigger house, all of these things that we sort of culturally bought into that define success, and yet it has nothing to do with what makes us happy.
Yeah. All right, we are going to take our top of the hour break. When we come back, we're going to switch this from an executive point of view and being an executive coach to being more of a life coach for every individual in every scenario. There are lots of different places, I think, in everyday life that what you're talking about can really resonate with people. Stay tuned. You're listening to Freshwaves on Whistle FM. We have Bill Cotric in the studio this morning. I'm your host, Bren Masson. We'll be back with more Changing Dimensions.